As we can see, public health is a major issue in the United States of America right now. For the last 20 to 25 years, most Americans have had no health care coverage. And if they did receive coverage, it was under some form of welfare or poverty-driven system by Medicaid or something that the government provided for people who could not provide for themselves, where it would be against the law for them to not provide some type of treatment for the people who did not have enough economic sustainability to be able to fund their own health care. Some people are wondering what the big deal is about this healthcare issue in what they call the Obamacare, which is the Affordable Health Care Act. It's not really called Obamacare. It's the Affordable Health Care Act. And some people are wondering, what's the big deal? All he was trying to do is make sure that people could get health care. And now they're talking about it's going to be repealed and that Mr. Trump wants to pass his version of a health care bill for Americans. Now, to his credit, because he did a lot of things that were unsuccessful and wrong and bad too, Barack Obama did. To his credit, if he did not take the initiative to institute something that would assure that Americans who want to be protected and represented by health care, if he did not do something to institute mechanisms for that to be possible, we wouldn't be standing in this period today. Health care would not really even be an option for us right now, because the Republican Party had their minds made up that they were going to continue on in the ways that they were. They knew that there would be a healthcare crisis and epidemic. You can channel that and check it by what's going on with the research in the medical schools and at hospitals and medical facilities around the world. They were going to deal with issues associated with the brain and neuroscience, which Ben Carson is a part of. They were going to deal with the traditional problems with things like stroke and heart disease. They were going to be dealing with a new component of mental health, because a mental health system can create lots of patients for hospital visits because of the kind of injuries people sustain while they're in an altered state of mind. They knew that Alzheimer's and dementia and other types of genetic problems would become healthcare complications that could not only be an individual problem, but something that they could use as a family problem, as a genetic problem. You can literally gentrify people by way of health by not getting treatment. They know that untreated healthcare complications lead to other forms of disease or deterioration of body parts, and it can kill you. You don't have dental care. You can't get your teeth done. Well, that's going to affect your heart, because heart disease is an infection. They're telling you it's all this other stuff, but heart disease is an infection. Okay? An infection that can come as a result of not having proper care, an infection that's set up in your head, in your brain, in your teeth, or somewhere, ends up going in down into your valves of your heart and setting that inflammation and infection up on a path to something that becomes a bacteria, a literal bacteria in your heart that becomes an infection. And if you don't treat an infection, if you don't treat something that's causing your arteries, your valves to be clogged through grease and all kinds of other things that are in some of the products that people were using to try to nourish people, if you don't figure out some kind of way to get that clean back out, you have a problem. That's all a portion of heart disease. It's infection. Because if your blood cannot flow, it's going to set up bacteria where the blockage is, and it's going to become an infection. So Barack Obama, to his credit, and a lot of people were against the Obamacare that they claim is Obamacare. I voted for Obamacare, not because I support everything that Barack Obama did, but because I support health care for Americans in this country. And I think her name was Kathleen Sebelius, or whatever her name was, the lady that was running and in charge of Health and Human Services at that time. I thought she did something that was profound for Americans in trying to assure that this system would come to pass. She is a hero in this country that people do not recognize. She took the heat for the whole nation to assure that this thing would be instituted, so that even if unsuccessful on the first try, something would be instituted so that your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your loved ones, your wife, your husband can be assured that they can receive adequate medical health care treatment through a health care plan that assures that they can get what they need. Without health care, a lot of people are vulnerable. With all of the toxins, with all of the bacteria, with all the fungus and viruses that are in society, anybody can get sick no matter how healthy you are. There are unforeseen accidents and tragedies that can lead to things. You can be exposed to other people through contagions and contaminations. So everybody was kind of vulnerable. And sure, there was a little bit of unnecessary alarm and panic about it. But you have to think about how vulnerable children are. You have to think about how vulnerable people are who have low immunodeficiencies and stuff like that. People need healthcare treatment because one sick person can cause other people to become sick. This is really important. And the Republican Party, in my opinion, should have done better at negotiating something to make the Affordable Health Care Act be viable so that we wouldn't need to spend so much on what we're spending so much money on today. And the Democratic Party should have reached across the line, reached across the aisle, and shown that they were more willing to consider more conservative approaches to how we could approach healthcare. Because to treat people, that means you are required to have nurses, practitioners, doctors, physicians, pediatricians, and whomever else is representing the healthcare system. Those people have to be paid because they have far more people in this nation and around the world than they have doctors and nurses at their disposal. It's a highly stressful job where you're asked to fix people's lives for them in a way that will repair them and restore them. That's worth something. And to consider that people are basically asking them to come in and do all of that work and get nothing for it is absurd. But to also tell them that they can take immeasurable amount of American resources and take as much as they want from it economically for their own life security and be unwilling to treat people because of their race or because of their class or because of their gender or because of some other issue that doesn't really have anything to do with why they're practicing medicine or a doctor or a practitioner, that's also wrong. And so Congress, to me, should have done better from the onset to try to facilitate things that would lead to a system where people would be represented better for healthcare in the first place. If they hadn't neglected to do something long ago before this imminent concern for healthcare became an issue, we wouldn't be at this place. They started working on this in the early 90s because they knew that whoever controlled the healthcare system literally controls human life in the United States. A doctor can determine whether you live or die. You can walk in completely healthy and leave dead. You can walk in on the brink of death and leave healthy. A lot of people have your life at their disposal through healthcare. And when you get sick, whether it's a natural sickness or whether it's what's most likely a man-made sickness, your life is in other people's hands sometimes. Your health is in other people's hands. And if you don't have your health, none of this stuff that we call life matters. So this stuff is very serious. Whoever would have the lead on how this healthcare system would be determined would be the people that would be on the economic frontier. The more people you can get to believe that healthcare is valuable, the more people that you can believe that you can get treated with real healthcare, the more rich you become. A lot of the hospital system is financial, it's economic, completely, absolutely. It's strange when you see people that represent you in the public domain, public service people, congressmen, congresswomen, the president. They can go get their healthcare treatment at taxpayer expense. Something happens to their teeth, they can get their whole mouth redone at our expense. But you got Americans out here that work, and a portion of their check is being taken for the endurance of the time and for the duration of the time that they are employed, and they have no guarantee that they can get basic health care. They have no guarantee that they can get access to the resources that their tax-paying dollars fund when they work or when they spend money in places of business. This stuff is serious. And you have to look at who might be greatest affected and most affected by the deficiencies in a system with no health care plan and without employment. Obviously, poor people. Obviously, people who are of a certain race. Obviously, people who are of a white race, even who are impoverished, they're going to be the most susceptible to being exploited. You should not have your life and your liberty endangered because you couldn't get treatment, because nobody would provide adequate care. You shouldn't have to go get some lower end generic spectrum of an artificial replication of something that was supposed to be done correctly, that the people that have the money can afford, but the poor people can't. They're not supposed to be giving you a substitute. That's almost like telling you that some people get something that's gold and some people get something that's gold plated. Obviously, you know that the stuff that's gold plated has less value. So why aren't they making sure that if you're represented, you get the same service as everybody else? If you have the system set up to be divisive in the first place, it's not going to work. But when it's said and done, all systems have to be paid for and funded. And the people have to determine what is the money that I work for or that I spend on, no matter how it goes into the system, what is that worth? And should you be able to get something that you didn't work for? Okay, if a person gets welfare, if a person gets poverty resources, they get a resource that people that don't live under the poverty system get, whether they contribute to society or not. All of this is fundamentally wrong. And unfortunately, I have to make the admission that Congress and the presidents of the past failed for not confronting this properly in the first place. But nobody knew what was going to happen. They wanted to institute all of their new medical mechanisms, robotics, and new forms of healthcare before they passed the Affordable Health Care Act. Because if you pass the act before you put all of these things into motion, then how are you going to pay for the equipment that it takes to provide the treatment? And so it was a very, very complicated and is a very complicated issue, because at the same time people have to be treated. Remember, there's overhead. Doctors need tools. They need clothes. They need facilities. They need bedding. They need the things that are going to be able to accommodate a patient while they're there under treatment. They have to serve demographics like prisons and places where people are thrown out of society but still require health care. That's all a part of a democracy. That's all a part of public health. This is not just something where they can just say, okay, everybody vote for it and go for it. It has to be paid for. It has to be something that is planned. You have to know where the revenues that are going to sustain a healthcare system come from. You can't just let the rich people who stole from the poor or appear to have stole from the poor kill the poor in order to sustain their own wealth and kill them by way of healthcare. Look how many people die from healthcare complications, which leads to other issues. People are saying, well, should a person who smokes, chain smokes all their life and destroys their own lungs, should they get precedence in a hospital for treatment and healthcare before a person who doesn't smoke? Because they cause their own problem. Should a person that lives in morbid obesity, who will eat everything they can consume until their body can't take it anymore, should they be given a position at the front of the line before people who didn't do what they did to cause their own healthcare complication? This is not just a simple issue. What they're trying to do is come up with something so that all people who are trying to sustain a healthy lifestyle, who deserve it, have an opportunity to get the treatment that they need and the proper care that they need. They're not really focused on the people who abuse themselves, because people who abuse themselves, healthcare treatment can't fix their problems a lot of times, because they have destroyed something so badly that it defeats the purpose of healthcare. And so they kind of take themselves out, so to speak. And I don't want to have to make that admission, but that's often what happens. When you do get those experts that come in and correct something that will otherwise have killed somebody, that's worth something. And that's all they're trying to argue. The people who contribute to the deterioration of public health most should not be on the forefront of this dialogue. They should not be the ones trying to complain about what they get or don't get, because they're not really even contributing to their society in a proper way. And you can't say that. You have to make sure it looks like everybody's being represented regardless of the circumstances. It's just like education. You got people that are required to be in schools that teachers have to deal with, whether this student is correctable, whether they plan to learn, whether they behave or not. You're responsible for this child while they are in education custody throughout the school day. You have to educate this person with basic studies if they're willing to adhere to the principles of education. You don't get to say, oh, because you're poor, oh, because you're cognitively impaired, oh, because you're brain dead, oh, because you're stupid, oh, because you don't value what you're getting, we're not going to teach you. The system requires that you take all students in the same, even though all students are really not the same. So when you're talking about making a mechanism that represents all Americans, it's not as simple as it seems. And it seems like people that are in these high positions would be able to communicate that more effectively, but all of them aren't necessarily as gifted as some of the people who are not in those positions. And I'll just say it that way. So this is a serious issue. So when it's said and done, is this going to be another thing where some people continue to get health care and others don't? Or some people are going to get adequate health care and others aren't? Or what is this going to be about? Because right now in America, we don't have any things that gives any validation, any value or worth or profit or gain to the people who retain good health. You don't even get a benefit. You should be able to get a good tax write-off or something for trying to be more responsible about your health. It's like the more healthy you are, the less you get. Our system is driven by the people who go out and abuse their health most of the time. Now, we obviously want to treat people who have real sickness. Like when you're talking about the kids at St. Jude and other people who have issues like women who end up with breast cancer and all of this kind of stuff, you want to try to do what you can to help those people with their health care. But hopefully they have also contributed to their society in a manner where they deserve to get the proper health care. The kids, they have to get treatment. It's not their fault that they're ill. They didn't go out and try to be sick. We have to protect them. It's not something that's discretionary in that way. Because we were given the gift of life. Those nurses and doctors could have ruined our birth. We could have died. Our mothers could have aborted us or done anything. And they gave us life. So we are indebted to make sure these children are protected until they're old enough to defend their own health. And then if they're old enough to defend their own health, they need to have something that they can adhere to that's reasonable, that's going to help them sustain their health. And that's what the life cycle is all about. You have all of these people out here preaching about what they need. Addicts and people who ruin their health on purpose. They get more than the healthy people. And it's wrong. It's unfair. That's how the healthcare system ended up deteriorated, where the people who actually deserve to get health care can't get health care because they're considered more healthy than a person who went and ruined their life, who went and ruined their health. And we need to talk about this. It's not just about what you eat. Healthcare has more to do with far more than just what you eat and consume and drink. You got to eat what you got to eat to stay alive. But usually the problem is not about what you eat, it's how much of it you're eating and how you're eating it and what they're putting into what you eat. And so if you're not going to empower doctors to empower your personal health, what are you complaining about? And so what is Congress going to do? Are we going to end up in the same position we were with just a different version of the same thing? Or what is this really all about? If people aren't working, how are they going to pay for health care? They don't have an explanation for a lot of this stuff, but people need health care now. They've got to do something. And they want to rid themselves of what Barack Obama instituted because there were serious flaws in it. A lot of people were still going to go unrepresented, but I will argue on his behalf, and I'm not going to argue much on his behalf because he has a lot of failures. I will say this, if he hadn't taken the initiative to put the Affordable Health Care Act into motion, this would not be a topic, and a lot of public health would be in danger right now. And so I'm going to give him credit for that. He deserves credit for that part. He didn't fulfill it. He didn't carry it out. He didn't do it right, but it's better than doing nothing, which a lot of people are doing, which amounts to nothing. There are real Americans out here right now who need service and treatment all the time. And they're always coming with far too little and far too late. And they're sitting up there being paid at taxpayer expense to occupy our time and our resources. And they're not making sure that the people are adequately represented. And they've got to improve this before this becomes a crisis. We're just one contagion away from a major, major problem. And sometimes the only insulation you have is your awareness of what the healthcare issues of the day are going to be. And if you don't have a healthcare system in play, You can't even educate people about healthcare because that's part of it too. Healthcare education is part of the Affordable Health Care Act. I don't think you should be funding people to sit in a bathtub full of cereal and milk and play with it like that. But you've got to do something to inspire interest in the seriousness of it. Milk does matter. You do need milk. But to see a black woman pretending to be naked, sitting in a bathtub full of cereal, something about that is strange. It doesn't seem like that money was put where it was supposed to be put in the right way. You don't want to send the kind of signal that healthcare is something to be played with. If you get sick, you're going to need a lot more than a bathtub filled with cereal and milk. You're going to need somebody to show up for you, and it won't be the president when you get sick, but he showed up for a person sitting in a bathtub full of milk and cereal. I don't think that's the right message to send, and I'm not trying to be against that female. It's a clever, creative marketing ploy, but public health is something serious. It's not really something to play with in that kind of way at the time when people's economics are distressed. So Barack Obama has a lot of failures on a lot of levels in a lot of places on purpose. But he got some of it right, and we need to give him his credit where he deserves his credit. He wasn't giving other people who helped him be who he is credit. But we have to give him credit for that little bit. Michelle Obama tried to do something to change the course of the health pyramid, the food pyramid. And I don't know if that worked or didn't work, but it's something that brought a new kind of awareness to the kinds of food portions and the kinds of food diversity that you need to have a healthy diet. I don't know for sure it's effective or ineffective, but it brought a new awareness by having a new look to the pyramid. And that's all good stuff. I don't think the food pyramid should ever have died, and I don't think it will ever die. But you have to do something to raise public awareness of the need for those kinds of food. It helps food even be sold. You know, some people don't even realize they need to eat certain kinds of things until they see something that shows them, oh, I'm supposed to have that. That'll make me feel better. That'll make me look better. That'll make me big and strong. You have to teach children about that from a young age. There are some failings. There are many failings in the Barack Obama administration. But one of the failings was not his attempt to try to do something to make sure that people could have access to health care. The problem that he failed at the most, which is the same problem that we're seeing this new administration potentially fail at, is how do you pay for health care if you don't have a job? How do you pay for health care if you don't have any money coming in? So if you're just going to orchestrate a different way to do the same old thing to exploit poverty, to keep people in a dependent class so that rich people get one kind of health care and poor people get a different kind of health care, you're not really getting anybody anywhere. So I want to see how this is going to play out. And I'm going to let them do their work. But I sure as hell hope they don't take too long again, because people's real lives and their health are at stake now. Some of it is their fault and some of it is society's fault. Some people's health care only deteriorated because they couldn't afford it. Well, whose fault is that? If a public official that represents you can go get whatever treatment they need in any kind of way covered at taxpayer expense, but a taxpayer can't go to the doctor. They can't go to the dentist. They can't go to the gym and get access to it because they don't have the money to. And if they do get treatment, they're stuck with a debt that could last them their whole life because they didn't have the money and the means to. So something about this was fundamentally wrong 25 years ago, when Dr. Sullivan was helping them orchestrate the healthcare system of the future. When the surgeon generals who were there before were in place. I don't know if Kathleen Sebelius was the surgeon general or if she was in charge of health and human services, but they all run in unison. They're all part of the same system. You couldn't really tell what the hell was going on in some parts of Barack Obama's administration. They started trying to consolidate positions, so to speak, to more efficiently use dollars. So it can look like one person is in one role and they can be serving 2 or 3 different roles. And it was just a way to try to provide the service and the need in a way that would not deprive Americans of awareness that nobody was serving in those positions. He had to appoint a lot of people a lot of times. There were a lot of people coming and going. So I don't really know what for sure these people were doing, but I know that the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Surgeon General could not do those jobs without one another, is what I'm trying to say. And so Barack Obama got that part right. Now, what is Donald Trump going to do to show that he's doing something more so than he claims was done with the Affordable Health Care Act they call Obamacare? Because he hasn't had to have problems paying for his health care. He hasn't had to have problems paying for his dentistry. He hasn't had problems having to pay for his gym membership or something. He could fund his own doctor. He could fund his own private dentist. He could fund paying for his own private gym. He could fund paying for his own trainer. And so I don't want Americans in this country to be misled again. If they're not going to get anything, then go ahead and tell them so you don't set them up for false hope like they're included in something that they're not going to get. I remember this old lady, this old white woman from the South with this Southern dialect that was a racist woman screaming out loud down here that it doesn't matter how much you black people vote, you're still not going to get anything for it. Is Donald Trump going to do something to make sure people are represented? Now, without making you think that I'm coming down on Mr. Trump because Mr. Trump is trying to do some things right, I want to tell you that black people have some responsibility in their own health upkeep too. Tavis Smiley and some other people got together and wrote something called the Covenant, which is what they claim were all of the things that it would take to empower black people in the 21st century. He gave away all of the things that show what it takes for black people to be strong and in position of gain. So the people that are trying to be oppressors and disenfranchisers, they gave them all of the tools that black people have for survival. And they set up mechanisms to cut off the employment, cut off the health care, cut off every resource that it would take for black people to become empowered. And black people were leading the way, helping do some of that. We have to look at what the predecessors did before Donald Trump came into office. This is not Donald Trump's fault. I believe Donald Trump is trying to do what he can to correct and instill something that will take the healthcare system in America forward. But there are other imminent needs that people need right now that are being ignored by the same Congress and the same president that people need urgent assistance with right now. And while they're occupying themselves talking about health care, if you don't have a job, you don't have nothing to eat, you don't have nothing to drink, you don't have clothes on your back, what does health care mean? And so these people are not in tune with what's really going on. They're not living the life of real Americans. There are people that went out and had all those children playing with the family system that they believed that was supposed to lead them to a bright future. Now they got all these kids. They got students that are in college and all of this stuff that they're obligated to under debt. And then you're talking about adding another bill, which is a healthcare expense, because they can't sustain what they've been doing. If their health is failing them and they're growing older and weaker, like what does this mean? This stuff is very serious and we need to take it serious. And I would suggest we try to do what we can to assist Mr. Trump. And if there are some things that are wrong or need to be improved, we need to bring those matters to his attention so that he and Congress can get together and figure out how to provide those things for the Americans in the ways that will take away those insufficiencies. Because something about this whole system is going to end up worse if we don't confront these issues. People don't care about their personal health until it reaches a point where they have to or need to. And a lot of people exploit other people's personal health so that they can roam around trying to act like they're more privileged, more entitled, and all of this kind of stuff. And what happens when the bottom falls out? And so it matters how we treat one another, whether it's in socialization or whether it's in healthcare. It matters what kind of treatment people get. And we need to be working on this now because it's overdue and it's way behind. And let's just see what happens. This is the Health Line. I'm your host, Reggie Radney, and I've got information for you.